out of duress. And I'm going to sound like one of those people who just like tries to shove in travel stories whenever they get a chance.
Okay.
But this was I don't know how many people have done this. For folks who have, let me know. But I went for this trek on like seeing an active volcano in Guatemala. And it was by far one of the most stressful treks that I have done in my life. And that was the last time I think I woke up with the sun to see the sun rays. But sun and I have not been friends for a while. No.
Wonderful. All right. And now let's see. All right. I'm playing with a new tool for presentations. So
There is going to be one of those like smallish groups.
okay.
So we can really get into the weeds of it. All right.
Wonderful.
So give me, before I start like the talk, and welcome everybody as well, but give us a skinny of like, what's the flow like? So what are you gonna cover?
Absolutely. So what I really want to like talk about is how to collaborate like effectively with immigration services providers, whether you're going with someone who's more like last mile, where you prepared your own portfolio and you just need someone to like package it up and put it in like USCIS friendly formatting, all of that stuff, versus like establishing a relationship with, an attorney who you're working with really closely over a longer period of time on maybe some of that portfolio development, effectively like across that spectrum, right? What are some strategies that we can use to like really own your process, as well as like have some insights into what the process looks like internally? I'll spend a little bit of time going through just like the top, like, sort of high level considerations, particularly in like case, like strategy preparation and onboarding. And of like applying sort of my lens to the 8 like O1A criteria that carry over to EB1. I'm happy to speak to like the 2 O1B criteria that are relevant as well, or like EB1B, but I figure just for the sake of time, that's the most effective way to kind of go about moving through those. And then, just closing off with some like more general considerations about how like collaboration drives like an effective case preparation experience, right? There's a lot of like, your experience is one that I think of often in terms of like how you like what can it be like to engage with a legal team or not be engaged with by a legal team. And so thinking about just some like general practices for like how to set expectations, not only with yourself, but like sharing those with your provider. That's like a huge thing that comes up in my work, right? Is like that sort of like what goes unsaid or unspoken, and with consideration of, I mean, whether it's travel, whether it's what wasn't urgent until it became urgent, and then trying to preempt the, well, why didn't you tell me, right?
Correct.
So one of the things that I really want to, in going through the criteria, is sort of like top of funnel, what can we get ahead of? There's always going to be an iterative aspect to this work. It's always going to be at least slightly revisionist in terms of, we have this and now we need to tighten this up, or we need to reframe this such that it's like effective with our full case strategy. I'm just going to line up my background here.
All right. It's a lot to unpack, but I'm going to say hi to folks who came.
Wonderful.
PR, Vijay, Subhan, Sola, Shailesh, Santosh. SAT, I don't know what that is. What is your name, SAT? Ranita, Praveen, Pralad, Nitin, Muhammad, Manjunath, Lokesh, Linda Deng, Krupal, KK, Jatin, Jas, Harshal, Fasi. I'm going to say all the names because I have capacity today. Fasi, Dev, Bhavnish, Ben, of course, Ashwini, AP, and Aditi. All right. With a show of hands, how many folks have gone for an attorney consultation here? Let me see. You can do this. Can you do this? Okay. People who have gone for attorney consultation. Subhan has gone. Harshal has gone. Ranita, Prahlad has not been. Nitin Vishnoi has not been. Aditi has been. All right. So I'm kind of glad that this is more of an setting because I have questions to ask to Ben, which are not the most politically correct. And I know that Ben is a safe space who can answer these questions. He gives me the vibe of the best friend that I wish I had when I was going through this journey. In case you don't know me, my name is Aditi Paul. Been creating content in the EB1 space since I got my EB1. People think that I'm doing this for you, but honestly, this is for me. This is how I heal. Because EB1 was, for the lack of a better term, a very trying journey for me. And it was not trying because of the hard work that I needed to do. It was because I had a very tumultuous relationship with my legal team. And if you are early in the journey, you may have this conception in your mind that, hey, if I can get an attorney to say yes, it's smooth sailing from there. And that's nothing could be further from the truth from there. I have learned it the hard way. There are immigrants just like me who have learned it the hard way. So my goal in bringing Ben today is to give you the foresight that I wish I had when I was going through this journey. And that foresight was, how do you engage with an immigration firm, law firm? Nobody teaches us that. We think that the lawyer that we talk to is the lawyer who's going to handhold us through the entire process. Does not happen a lot of times. There's a battalion of people behind the scenes who's going to be supporting your case. And it is in your best interest for your physical, mental, and immigration well-being that you learn the chops of how to do that. And I could not think about anybody else who's better fit to talk about this than Ben Merrill. Benjamin and I, we met in 2023. Sucks for him, great for me. He has worked with some of the most prominent law firms out there. He's worked with Deal, he's worked with Vanguard Visa. Now he's working for an equally noteworthy firm. But Ben knows what it's like to support an attorney and support an immigrant. He is the middleman who you want to be friends with. So without further ado, I'm going to bring on Ben. Ben, you know the drill. From now to 12:30, 12:35-ish, we are going to go through the slide deck that you've prepared for us. And then I'll open up the gates for everybody who's here to ask questions to you. Please remember that Ben is not an immigration attorney. He is an immigration specialist. So if you're looking for, am I ready for EB1 type questions? This is not the platform for you. This is the platform where you learn how do you work with an immigration team. Everybody cool with that? Can I get a thumbs up? People are on the same page with me? Awesome. All right, Ben, go for it. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for having me again. It feels like it's not been that long since we chatted about transitioning from, I believe it was grad to green card. Was my last talk. So it's great to be here with all of you. I always appreciate the time to sort of pull back the curtain and talk about what it's like to be on this side of immigration services, right? So yeah, like Aditi said, I was previously with LegalPad Deal. Was with LegalPad during their acquisition to Deal, sort of saw that transition where I was in a very O1 heavy practice, but I'm also very proficient in H1Bs and Ls. Those are sort of my bread and butter. And then, went into boutique firm operations for a bit where I got to work with a really talented attorney, sort of scaling his independent practice, going from solo to a small boutique team. And so I've helped scale what we call like high achieving EB1, EB2, and IW01 practice, and sort of seeing like the mechanics of what that looks like from a firm operations perspective. And, in that done a lot of onboarding, as well as like sort of handing folks off from the point of sale to the point of like, our case strategy is set, I'm going to meet with my attorney. And so I'm looking forward to bringing that, as well as some of my current experience working at Lighthouse, where I am back to preparing O1s, EP1s, and sort of in the thick of, handling people's evidence, chasing, what is going to close that last mile to really convert your case from a draft to a filing. And yeah, so, please, I really encourage questions, so please, hit me with your best when it comes to the end. I want to make this as useful to you all as possible. So, keeping this simple, we're going to start with building a strong EB1 case. So how do we collaboratively and effectively work with immigration services providers? You've worked super hard in your career. You've worked super hard to prepare your portfolio of your career, and now it's time. So what does this look like in terms of the point of engagement? And then how can you, like, what areas can you take on greater agency to really like drive and own your process and not feel subject to the greater currents of what's going on in your attorney's firm, in the country, all of that good stuff. So we'll dive into the specifics of what makes these partnerships successful. And, you know, with that foundation laid, let's just jump right in. Awesome. So why immigration services providers matter? Aditi, I pulled some quotes from your posts because I thought they were very prevalent and a good way to kind of frame this experience. So every successful EB1 case reflects a precise and coordinated effort between the applicant and their legal support team. It's important to understand that like we serve as process architects as well as, you know, quality control professionals. First and foremost, obviously we're doing the work of like preparation, but we're also, you know, there's a lot that goes into choreographing how this works. So some of the other things we do is like documentation management, where we organize and like maintain comprehensive filing records. Like we are managing your critical dates. We are tracking, you know, all of those pending items for different exhibits. So, you know, once I draft, I say, okay, I have this huge outline now. I need like, you know, Jitesh to give me his pay stubs. I need Jitesh to follow up with his employer to see if we can't get that letter. You know, I'm keeping a live ledger of everything that's sort of still pending behind the scenes. Evidence translation. This can be quite literal. You know, once we get into that adjustment of status territory, you need to get a translated birth certificate. Your degree might be in a different language, but translation here is more so really thinking about communicating to USCIS what your accomplishments mean in a way that is most legible and friendly to them. So the way that I like to sort of frame this is like, how would I broker a conversation between you, Aditi, and my grandmother at a dinner table talking about your expertise, right? Sort of, you know, how would I communicate to someone who has some technical understanding of how this fits into the process, as well as someone who would have no idea what go-to-market sales means or architecting data management pipelines, right? You know, what does it mean to fundamentally introduce someone to your work? And so that also means being able to, you know, really discern high quality evidence from not high quality evidence to be able to surface those accomplishments, right? So I'll talk a little bit about what that means, which feeds into the third point here, quality assurance. So in turning, you know, in terms of not just like your documentation, but like your case writ large, you know, maintaining consistency, compliance with regs, quality control across every component of your petition package. This goes to your forms. This goes to your immigration documents. You know, are we providing a comprehensive audit of your immigration history when we file? Are we demonstrating that you've maintained your status as long as is necessary, depending on the type of filing that we're providing? And then even more broadly, you know, quality assurance in the sense of we know what the regs are asking for. We know very clearly the regulations actually aren't that complex, right? They can be, you know, a little hard to discern, maybe, you know, as a non-expert, but when you get into the work to the degree that I have, it's very easy to tell what is and isn't going to hold. And so I'm going to try to share with y'all some of the high-level points in terms of how can we bring quality to the top of the preparation of our case so that way things don't dissolve or fall apart. Too often I've seen, especially when folks feel really rushed to prepare a filing, you know, there's understandably a degree of quality that might decline by virtue of necessity, but it's about thinking through what's going to help keep that needle pointed towards success at the very highest level in terms of like legibility of your evidence, the ability to contextualize it. And so, yeah, I look forward to in this next phase sort of ask like, what is USCIS looking for, and how can we like best understand that from the point of like collaboration with a provider? So, you know, understanding what USCIS looks for. Critical role and original contributions are the backbones of a solid EB1 or O1 case. And so we're all very familiar with these regs, if not at a high level. Critical role is going to ask, you know, Did you hold a critical or essential role within an organization of a distinguished reputation? So this is demonstrating that, whether you are an individual contributor, you can be an individual contributor and still get critical role. That's something that I like to highlight as well. Or if you've managed, you're a director and executive, demonstrating how you were indispensable to an organization. Now, the other side of this is distinguished reputation. You can't just have a critical role and the organization not have distinction. Thankfully, this is pretty straightforward in terms of what do we have to hit: criticality and distinction. And so, when it comes to collaborating with a provider, I would say, being able to ensure that what we're sharing is verifiable through an external reference, right? I had the privilege to hear from a few different USCIS professionals recently, and they do read expert letters. There's a lot of discourse in the field around, the weight that gets put into letters. Are these used as external validation? Are these used to establish a narrative? They are secondary evidence. And so just to pause at that point, across all criterion, letters are great context. Letters are great for the implicit. They're very helpful to fill in the gaps in terms of, I can get evidence of project management or technical leadership through screenshots of linear dashboards or Notion databases, right? I can show that my name is on all of these different tasks, projects, etc. And then I'll get that validated by another executive, a skip level manager, something like that. But ultimately, the evidence should be able to speak for itself. Documentary primary evidence should speak for itself. Expert letters are considered secondary evidence because they are speaking to what we are trying to show, right? And so one of the things that I wish I could tell all of my past, future, present clients is yes, the letter is very important, but ultimately we cannot just rely on the letter. The letter cannot be the core foundation of an argument, right? That's going to invite a higher degree of scrutiny from USCIS if we have a letter that espouses really great accomplishments, maybe a few sweeping generalizations, and then we can't back it up with documentary evidence, whether that's, screenshots of an organizational chart that shows the number of employees that you manage or the projects you oversaw in your tenure, whether that's, like I said, project management databases. I love Notion docs that have authorship indicated on them, any sort of internal documents that include your name, right? By Ben Merrill, by Aditi Paul. That way we can, explicitly state that this is linked to you. Great thing to do at the top of the funnel. Ensure that all of the evidence for your critical role and conversely your original contributions, we can usually double dip. There's some instances we can't, and that's okay. But I like to try to, when I show criticality, I also like to demonstrate originality. So there's, just broadly between those two, get your name on everything. And I understand intellectual property can be difficult as well, depending on who your employer is. If you work for a very large enterprise company, a FANG, a Witch, anything like that, you're going to have a bit of a harder time getting that evidence in terms of a company's legal team signing off. I would never say never, but then it prompts us to think about where can we leverage in that gap? How can we, if I can't get my name on documents that show that I led, the architecting and execution of a really significant project for my department, for my division, is there someone who, or there external resources that discuss the outcomes that I could then link to my work through a letter, right? So if your company has white papers that are, unrolling a new product suite or something like that, and you can get an executive that details how you led those contributions, that is a way to fill in that gap. So I'm not going to be totalizing and say don't give us evidence that you can't get your name on, but thinking about how we can really fold in at the top of funnel, right? When you are engaging someone, when you're onboarding, fold in that layer of clear ownership when we're preparing. That way, for someone like me who, I get handed off a case strategy I'm reviewing documents. I'm saying, okay, like this is what we're trying to hit in the letter. Here's what we're trying to hit for criticality or originality. Here's what we're trying to hit for major significance or distinguished reputation. I don't have to get into the weeds of like discernment. There's clarity at the onset in terms of how these pieces fit together and how we're going to construct that narrative. So, you know, when it comes to sort of like proving this impact, right? Objective metrics are great. And then otherwise, the other qualitative demonstrations of, you know, adoption are really helpful as well. And then, you know, we can always contextualize this with letters, but what I want to drive home is that the more documentary primary evidence that you can get of criticality and originality, the better. When it comes to the supporting aspects of those, distinguished reputation, major significance, your provider's usually going to be able to pull information for that. You know, it's very helpful if you have an idea of what you'd like to provide there, but if there's relevant press that speaks to your work, whether that's industry papers, whether that's, you know, something hopefully beyond a Medium article, you know, things in news outlets or just other you know, industry forums, that's great. We can usually flip that and, you know, frame it as we need to. So I would say, you know, what's most important is just really focusing on the criticality and originality components, and not just like articulating what the problem is that you're solving and the innovation that you provided or the intervention that your work provided, but then its impact, right? So that's like sort of the big three that we look for when we are reviewing evidence. At least me personally, you know, I want to see like a very clear framing of what the problem solved. If you can't tell me what the problem or the previous state of the industry of the field is, then I have a really hard time articulating how the innovation's impact matters, right? So it's that sort of 3-point problem, innovation, impact. There's plenty of other ways we can frame that, but if you can hit those 3 points, we can do the rest, right? And if you can communicate to us clearly and provide really legible documentary evidence where I can see this and be like, oh yeah, okay, this makes sense, at a high level without having to get into a really in-depth narrative, think about how that's then easy to communicate to a USCIS officer. So the more explanation that you might have to provide to the evidence that's being presented, the more work there's going to have to be done in terms of translating that context to an adjudicator. And so I'll really quickly speak to original contributions as well, you know, thinking about how we frame this within the context of the field, being able to very clearly articulate to your provider what it is that really moved the needle here and how you can demonstrate that. You know, sustained revenue, user metrics, citations by other folks in the field. We can't argue originality if we can't show major significance. So I'll really quickly, just being mindful of time, move into demonstrating recognition and authority, judging, press coverage, and authorship. These are really accessible in terms of like resources around what is good in EB1 land and what doesn't hold water in EB1 land. Think about Globee Awards versus, you know, an IEEE award, right? What I'll say across all three of these is you want it to be clear validation amongst other experts in your field. Press coverage is a bit of an exemption here in terms of you're being reported on by maybe non-experts, but they are recognizing your leadership in the field. Then judging and authorship specifically, you know, you're really going to want to lean into opportunities that demonstrate, you know, expert validation through peer review or an editorial process. And I'm happy to speak more to that in depth. And then, yeah, let's get behind the curtain really quickly. So this is the sort of process that we go through internally. And I'm happy to sit here, Aditi, if we want to return to this slide and like anchor examples here. But it's, you know, effectively, like there's a lot going on behind the scenes in terms of, you know, you'll get an email or maybe you'll get something pushed from a portal. And you do one thing and you're waiting and you're sort of just wondering, like, what is this black box that I'm sitting in, right? What the hell is going on? And so just as a high level, I tried to map out here what else is going on behind the scenes. So when it comes to like case launch or onboarding, like, you know, you're sharing a ton of documents. Hopefully you've labeled them all very nicely, so that way I don't have to rename every single one. Folders are super helpful here as well, by criterion or by accomplishment, right? If you're a really seasoned peer reviewer and you've reviewed for several different IEEE journals, you know, different transactions, different letters, what have you, group them by engagement. That helps us so much in terms of just effectively sorting through what can we argue, what can't we argue. And to that point, when it comes to evidence collection and preparation, we may not include everything. That's also not to say that it's not worth including, but for the sake of a streamlined, clear narrative, we may, you know, it's like pruning a tree, you know. Yes, there's healthy growth, but I'm trying to make it topiary, right? I want my rose bush to be nice and rounded, spherical. If it has this lump here that's like worthy, you know, there's good flowers on that branch, but ultimately it doesn't contribute to the whole picture, we might leave it out. What you can expect from a provider then is an explanation as to why. This doesn't align clearly with the field of endeavor that we're arguing. You know, yes, it's really good, like adjacent work, but we'll throw it in sustained claim rather than, you know, tack it on to like one of the 8 criteria that we're arguing. And so, you know, I invite questions along like different stages of this, but for the sake of time, again, I won't like go and read them. But this is all to say that there's a lot that we do behind the scenes, and you are entitled to ask what's going on, when can I expect to hear back from you, and like where are we and why in the process, right? So that's something, you know, like I found particularly in more traditional legal contexts, right? It's very much you do this and then we'll get back to you when we're ready. You are entitled to ask questions around, you know, dependencies. You're entitled to ask questions about, you know, review, all of that good stuff. And so I certainly invite further conversation around here. And then working effectively together. How to be a strong EB1 partner. This is where we're going to dive into how you can be an exceptional collaborator in the EB1 journey, which isn't just about guiding you, it's about, you know, partnership, right? One of the reasons that I love the work that I get to do is that I get to work with people. Yes, I will ultimately work for you. You are my client, but I enjoy the process more. And I'm sure you all will too, if you find someone that you can work with, not have for, right? It needs to be like a bi-directional, iterative relationship where we're not just asking or telling, but we're engaging in like the how and the why together. So I framed this in terms of do's and don'ts at a very high level. So in terms of do's, like, you know, again, organize clearly. If you can structure your research or your materials in a way that's like systematic and clear, you're going to save your onboarding team so much time in terms of filtering through all of that stuff. So please take the time to name your files, drop them into folders. We can always rearrange them, but if you make that legible to us, that's just less time for us to have to figure out, come up with our own, you know, I mean, I will rename everyone's evidence, you know, and that's just a time suck, right? I can, you know, usually present that under the guise of I'm getting close to the case. I'm getting to understand your particular background. But you can facilitate that with clear naming conventions. And then similarly, precise communication, specific timelines, deadlines, constraints that affect your availability, right? If you are on a grace period, please, for the love of God, explicate you're on a grace period. We will prioritize you accordingly. You know, if there's an expectation that you are engaged in a regular meeting with your case preparer, whether that's the paralegal working most closely with your attorney, whether that's the attorney working on your case itself, set that expectation outright rather than I've onboarded and I haven't heard back and I think you're drafting my case. Like I got some letters, but now what? You know, are you able to meet? Are you able to meet? I would say it's much better to set that expectation at the beginning of your process. Hi, I know that this takes a little bit of back and forth. Can we commit to meeting once a week, twice a week, whether it's on a set cadence or not? You being forthcoming about what degree of engagement you expect from a provider or from the, your legal team. And again, as a paralegal, as an immigration specialist, I do a lot of liaising, right? I'm the person who can like run things up the ladder, run it back. And so feel, you're putting a lot on the line financially. There's a lot of, emotional investment here. And we want to be like that partner that's very high trust. I don't know anyone who works in immigration services that doesn't want to feel trusted and cared for by their clients. And so, particularly in the more formal sense, right? I can understand like trepidation there. I can also understand the expectation. Well, if I'm paying this much, right? Like, shouldn't you just do it? Ideally, yes. But, being able to approach the nature of this engagement as a professional relationship at the onset, rather than feeling like maybe an expectation wasn't met when we're already, halfway down the stream, we're already at the process of, preparing the memo or preparing, like auditing revisions, right? That's not the time to like set an expectation about how the engagement with your provider is going to look, right? And so one of the things that I think, just in general, the same way that you'd engage a doctor, the same way that you'd engage an interior designer for your home, the same way you'd engage a mechanic, right? Setting a very clear expectation on, how frequently you'd like to be updated, like the degree to which you want to be updated. Is this something that I could send you a quick 5 bullet high level email, or do you need a 30-minute call? Both are super valid. It helps to be clear on the onset what that expectation looks like for you. And then, deadlines, right? The best way to hold your provider accountable to holding deadlines is to meet the deadlines that are set by your provider, as well as the deadlines you set yourself. And trust, we all understand life happens. Oftentimes I have a pretty full docket. I won't be upset if someone lets me know, I'm traveling this week and I'm not going to be able to review those letters until Monday. Great. I'm going to make sure they're done and in your court to review, but being able to not only proactively communicate deadlines and when they shift, in terms of expectations on your end, it helps your provider work more effectively in terms of serving all of their clients. And so I'm always very appreciative when folks honor windows, that are set. And then, it makes it a lot easier for me to be held accountable by someone who has also held themselves accountable, right? To speak conversely to that, if someone ghosts me and then expects a full petition flipped or something like that, but I don't have what I need and asked for, that's not going to incentivize me to, put everything else on the side and get what they are asking for themselves. And then, again, ask questions.
Quick eye on the time, it's 12:34.
Yes, and this is the last slide, so we're all good.
Perfect.
Yeah. So, just ask questions and be sure to communicate like uncertainties early rather than making those assumptions about like different requirements, different aspects of our process. The more forthcoming we both are in communication at the onset, the easier it is to sustain a pattern and in nature of engagement that you would like and expect. So yeah, let's get on to Q&A. I have some notes here. I have one more slide, but this is great. So I'll just sit here.
Yeah, we can always allude, of course, if you give me the permission, I'll share this with the folks.
Wonderful. Gladly.
And if you're open to, consultations, people can book a time with you. But go to the slide before.
Yeah.
This gave me PTSD. You know why? Because I did everything you asked me not to do.
Yeah.
Because again, I'm telling you, folks, hindsight is 2020. How many people, with a show of hands, let's see, how many folks are just starting off their EB1 journey? Like, this is, can you just do this? Like, if you're just starting off your figuring out if EB1 is right for you. You're in the information gathering phase. You're still wondering how your profile is. Does it match EB1 or not? Like I know that you think that EB2 is a dead end, especially if you're Indian. Now you're looking at EB1. Great. So we have two. How many of y'all are in the thick of building your profile right now? Let's see. Like you know it now. Now you're in action mode. Okay, Prahlad, Sola, Lokesh, Aditi, Ranita. Okay. And how many of y'all are kind of figuring out that I've been building my profile for a while and now probably it's time for me to pick an attorney? How many people are in that phase? Okay, Prashant, okay, Praneeth, Krupal, etc. Great. I'll tell you what I wish somebody told me this before. It's one thing to get a yes from a lawyer. It's another thing to get the best out of the lawyer. Your lawyers are not magicians. Yes, you can have a great profile, but you can be a terrible person to work with. And I was a terrible person to work with because I had all the chops that it was required in an EB1 profile, but I oversubmitted. There are emails that I can show you where I have sent my lawyer saying that, hi, my lawyer, I just went and I talked at a conference. Does that count? What would she say, right? But I also want to hold her accountable because none of the right side of the screen was ever communicated to me. That, hey, like we need to set up a cadence. You will get an email from me once a week. None of that was communicated before. So as terrible as I was as a client, my lawyer too could have done a better job in communicating how she wanted to be worked with. So all of this hindsight is always 2020. If you have this idea that, oh, I want to file my EB1 in 6 months, I want to get out of this, I want to get a green card and live my life, things like this is going to mess up your happiness. So as theoretical as these sound, as principle, like best practices as these sound, this is what will make or break your case. Not the hackathon that you judged, not the IEEE paper that you wrote, not the millions of dollars that you saved. All of those fall secondary if you cannot grease up the levers of working best with your immigration attorney and their team. And Ben is one of those people who's at the helm of that team. So guide your questions to that end, not what are the qualifications of EB1, but ask probing questions on what do you mean by this? What are some things that I need to know? Like when you say go silent, what does that mean? So I hope that your questions are geared toward probing what you see in front of your screen. I hope that helps. Rajesh.
Yeah, hi, good morning, good afternoon, Aditi and Ben. Thank you for taking time and scheduling this meeting. So my question is more around behind the scene, I mean, recently applied for my EB1 and I got my RFE, 4 out of 5 criterias. Um, I mean, I'm not happy with my attorney, not because I got an RFE, but because the communication, like how it went back and forth,
Mhm.
I mean, so one thing that where I mean, I mean, I'm an IT professional. I don't have much experience about all this attorney stuff and like how you guys strategize the case, right? So behind the scenes, like I would like to understand, is the attorney is the attorney is gonna work on the case, or will it be the paralegal that work on all the documentation, and then the attorney will review and send it to the USCIS?
For sure, and that's a great question. I think this has to go more with I think that's a great question to ask at the top of, like finding a service provider, because it does look different law firm to law firm. If you work with a case preparation service like Deal or Lighthouse or Plymouth, right? In my case, right, I'm someone who, as a non-attorney, will receive guidance on case strategy from an attorney. They'll review the RFE. They'll say what worked, what what criterion were accepted, right? That informs how we can address those that weren't. And then, often it'll be a discussion internally, you know, after a meeting where we present the RFE or we share the RFE and then get on a call to request evidence. Typically that is with the attorney itself. I would expect that to be with the attorney, frankly. But then when it comes to the preparation of, you know, letters or assembly of evidence, that is something that I, as a non-attorney, would facilitate. You know, I would help draft those letters. You know, the attorney might revise them, the attorney might review them and tell me, hey, could you actually emphasize this, you know? But it's always going to have to be like greenlit by an attorney. And if you have like signed a G28 with an attorney as your representative, they're the ones who are putting their name on the work. So it is a little bit subjective, right? It depends on who you're working with and how they sort of structure their firm's workflows. But it's not unfair to expect an attorney be directly involved with an RFE response.
Following up on Raj's question, this is something that you have alluded to a lot. So, and this is also for folks who are thinking of working with a bit of a larger firm who have a legal team versus just one attorney. You keep talking about case strategy. What does a case strategy mean?
For sure. And it looks a little bit different, again, depending on where you are. You might get like a really nice formatted document that shows like your strong criteria that we're going to argue versus the ones that are like medium versus the ones we're not going to argue. But effectively, you know, when I say case strategy, I think of, you know, a comprehensive overview of how we're going to argue your case. So you've completed onboarding, whether it's a nice portal that's streamlined, you upload your evidence by bucket according to the EB1 criterion, or you old school, you know, share or get shared a Google Drive folder and you're asked to just upload your files. A case strategy is going to be something that's set by an attorney and a legal team, usually in collaboration, right? I do a lot of reviewing evidence to see if we're going to use it to argue something like critical role or original contribution. I'll ask an attorney for, you know, their subjective take on like, you know, this seems like it's really, you know, this is something that's really intriguing that I would want to follow up on. Can we ask for more, right? Or this is something that I think would distract from the overall profile because it might be, you know, before someone pivoted in their career field. But it's effectively that layer that after we filtered through the evidence and we've sort of, you know, defined what's going to be argued where, what's going to fit where, it's the confirmation between a legal team and the client on, you know, thank you for onboarding, thank you for giving us your evidence. This is how we are going to proceed. And so from a business standpoint, you know, from an operational standpoint, that's really critical in terms of then how your legal team's workflows are going to go, right? When I get a case strategy that's set, you know, it's usually like an overview of like the role that we're going to argue for a particular criterion. So we're going to say, you know, membership in Y Combinator, right? And so I know it's YC, I know when they were in YC, I know, you know, what makes YC a distinguished organization or, you know, have like prominence in the field, you know, if I'm doing tech entrepreneurship or something. Similarly, you know, if I'm arguing authorship, I know like this person has 35 papers that all have over 100 citations. They are prolific in their field. We're going to pick 5 to 10. These are the ones we're going to pick. They may not be the ones with the highest citation count, but we're picking them because they are most aligned with your field of artificial intelligence research, with your field of, you know, nuclear fission, with your field of underwater basket weaving, right? Whatever it be, you know, we want to ensure that there's that through line there. So I might, you know, not include the higher cited paper because it's not necessarily relevant. And that's something that when I say case strategy is set and confirmed with you and at the onset of the process, right? That way you have a clear understanding of what we are preparing, what that includes, what that may not include, and why, so that when it comes to like, hey, can you sign this letter? Or can you have someone go sign this letter? You're not like, what the hell is this? And why doesn't it hit XYZ, you know? I think that's something that's very subjective in terms of how different providers do it, but there will always be a version of we've reviewed your evidence and this is how we're going to proceed. And that's your opportunity to say, sure, but, and provide additional context. That's your opportunity to ask why. And that's your opportunity to also push back and say, no, I don't think that's the best direction. Let me give you more information to demonstrate why I think we should go in a different direction. Or, oh, I didn't realize this applied. It's those sort of probative questions that can really help lock in at the top of your case what is and isn't going to be included. You are empowered because you know what is and isn't going to be included, and you don't feel like you're being deceived. You don't feel like your case isn't being treated with the utmost care because something isn't included. That's sort of what I mean by case strategy and the why behind its importance.
That makes sense. So if I'm getting the flow right, it is you go to an attorney consultation, attorney reviews your case, says, yes, we will represent you. The next step is case strategy, where they have taken a look at the evidences that you have submitted and said, okay, this is how we're going to position you. This is what we need. Any questions? And at this is the stage of a client to say, hey, this does not make sense. Explain. This is what I agree with. Why? That is the time where you iron out the details, because right after that step, we're getting into the tangibles. We're getting into collection. We're getting into documentation. So I just want to keep that in mind, that before you get into action mode and saying like hastily, yeah, this is done, let's go. That is the time where you exercise your right as a client.
It's also particularly important in the context of my timeline is this, right? Like I need to file by this date. So, take advantage as soon as you can to get ahead of any delays that can arise because we're not aligned in our plan to proceed. This is also the great opportunity to say, I did this one hackathon and, they liked me so much that they've invited me back in December, right? It's October 19th, but I'm not going to be doing this until December. Is it worth for my particular situation? I don't have a filing deadline. I am sitting in, I have an approved perm. I'm on my H-1B. My visa's good to go back home and see family. Is it worth waiting until I have that additional event to file? Or do you think, provider, attorney, team, should we proceed without it? Sometimes, and it really depends on your case, and speaking with the folks who know your case the closest by virtue of having prepared it or preparing to prepare it. But saying, like, hey, I, just got signed up for some conference peer review. I don't have any judging in my portfolio yet, right? Would it be worth waiting until I can submit these reviews to include that in my petition? This is the time to do it. Much more so than, oh, thank you so much for the final review of my petition. I signed up for 3 hackathons. I want you to include them. That is the best way to get like this vein in my forehead throbbing, particularly when none of them have happened. And like, I can't do much for you in that regard, right? Like, it's
I get that.
But yeah,
we can't just throw shit at the team and like hope that they'll somehow be able to weave it in. So I'll give the floor to Sola and then we'll go down first.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. Thank you, Aditi. Could you please go to your preview, the slide before this?
Yeah. This one?
No, not this one. Before this again. Sorry.
Let me see. Was it a discussion of evidence?
No, yeah, it was more about the recognition. And,
yes. Excellent.
Yes, so I was expecting to see, what's it called, membership around this. I didn't see membership. Is there a particular reason?
Yeah, so I actually discussed membership more so in distinction and standing. So this is something that I glazed over when we were presenting, like just to hit all the criteria. So, consider like that's more of a subjective take on my part in terms of how I presented the criterion. But, awards and memberships are certainly also like recognition of authority, right? This is more just like kind of how I chose to craft the exhibits or the slides. Jeez, my legal brain.
Okay, that's fine. So I want to, you've answered a lot of my questions, but I just want more clarity around when is the best time to actually reach out to an attorney?
Yeah,
Right?
absolutely.
Exactly. When is the best time? Is it when you finish cooking everything, or at the point of starting out? Because
Yes.
I've done a lot of consultations in the last couple of weeks,
Mhm.
and then I found out that I've got different opinions saying, "Oh, Sam, go get all those things and then come back and then come and sign us up." Some will say, "No, come sign us up now. We want to work with you as you build." So I don't know.
Absolutely. And that's something to like really think about. I can tell you as a provider, I prefer when folks have a more complete profile, right? Because it means like all of the pieces are in place, or we know when those last few pieces will be coming in, right? If you have one pending judging engagement where, you know, I know that this is happening in 2 weeks and we just need to wait for, you know, the thank you email to include, like, that's great in terms of pending. If it's something like, you know, I have no authorship and I have 3 drafts, you know, in various stages of peer review, but nothing's been accepted, that's something that I'd say, you know, maybe wait until you engage an attorney. And the reason I say this, again, there's some folks who, and some providers who, you know, are really engaged in that development aspect. That's depending on whether you work with like a services provider that contracts attorneys, or like a traditional law firm. They may you know, there's a certain like liability there in terms of like giving legal advice that falls outside of the purview of some service providers, where they are a last mile, you know, document preparer. But it's going to be more so you know, how long do you want to be engaged with this legal team? Because if everything's not ready, if you have, you know, a pending judging activity that is going to be your only judging activity that you feel is necessary for your case, if you have membership applications pending, if you you know, still haven't been able to get evidence of your critical role, those are all things that you won't have then at the onset of your case strategy, that you sort of have to try to account for, but can't conclusively say you have. And that leads to a drawn out process. This is where, you know, asking about like service level agreements is really important. You know, at the point that I engage you, how long is this going to take? Because a service provider is almost always going to say, there's going to be an asterisk, you know, we can get this to you in 30 days. We can get this to you in 2 months. The caveat being, so long as you give us everything we need at the beginning of the process. And if they don't articulate that clearly, they will definitely say it later in a less clean cut, you know, forthcoming way. Well, you didn't share this with us. How are we supposed to know? So, you know, there's nothing wrong with finding a provider that you want to work with in terms of, you know, portfolio building. And if you have things that are in motion and you can demonstrate to them where that's at, and they can subjectively sort of determine whether they're comfortable with that, right? Whether that's something that they're okay with in terms of the work that they're doing. Because again, an attorney is putting their name on this. And I think it's really important for folks to understand that just because it, like, one attorney says yes, another attorney may not. And that's by virtue of how, like, the practice of law is as much of an art as it is maybe like a technical science, as something that's more exacting, right? There's going to be different like levels of like thresholds of tolerance there. And so I hope that answer was helpful in terms of, you know, the more concrete aspects of it, but then also it really comes down to like what you want that engagement to look like.
Thank you.
Yeah, there are several reasons that you can base your choice of picking an attorney. 2 of those reasons should not be your lack of patience and money. If you're choosing the cheapest attorney who can file your case the fastest, now that's a recipe for disaster.
Mm-hmm.
So there are several reasons based on which you can make this decision, but those 2 should not be the ones. Comments on that, Ben, given that you have worked with attorneys more than I have, obviously?
No, I mean, like that's a really fair point to make, you know, and you know, cash is not necessarily king, but right, like there's definitely like you should feel entitled to ask about like pricing. You can feel, you know, entitled to asking about why you charge more or less. I actually encourage that because it lets you see a little bit more behind the curtain, especially from someone who sells as opposed to someone who prepares a case, right? It helps you set accurate expectations at the top of your process.
Correct. AP Praneeth Reddy. We'll go till 1:15. Is
That's
that
great.
okay?
Yeah, I'm chilling.
Okay. All right. Cool. AP Praneeth Reddy. Go for it. One question per person, folks.
Thanks, Aditi. Thanks, Ben. I have a quick question. So I'm currently working on my O1 with my company's attorney. Apparently, I've shared all the details and they went off silent, and they have just suggested me to complete a certification such that I could get a letter of recommendation from one organization. I did do that, and now I have been asking them for what criteria are there, focusing on, strategizing. They're not responding to that and just saying that we got all the information. We'll let you know if we need anything from your end. That's all they keep saying. And other background is in my company, I'm the first person to file for O1. So I'm not sure how to navigate the situation. And they're not disclosing what criteria are they focusing, or neither they're asking any questions on the evidence that I've submitted. Yeah, that's where I'm at and confused.
Yeah, no, and I'm sorry to hear that. It sounds like yeah, you've been left in the dark regarding your process. And this isn't frankly uncommon, unfortunately, particularly with we'll call them enterprise immigration law firms, right?
Yeah, correct. Those are, yes.
The big ones, yeah. They rely heavily on their process to be able to handle the volume that they do, to be able to do that efficiently. I'm not going to say that it's poor quality, because it is not, right? Like, they know what works and they do what works because they know it works. But in terms of being, you know, engaged by that provider, that is something that, you know, I would definitely, you know, push back against, right? Because you have the right to see what's being involved in your petition. There's going to be an argument, and there's like a very solid, you know, justification for, you know, this is an employer-owned filing, right? This is something that's being, you know, paid for by your employer. This is something that's for you to be sponsored by your employer. That said, right, you should have more visibility into like what it is that's going on. And so what I would recommend is, you know, whether like first identify who in your organization is like the liaison between you and your firm, right? Or who on behalf of the company is doing this work. Is it an immigration or mobility specialist? Is it an HR business partner? Is it a people operations, you know, like analyst or something like that? You know, who is it that is coordinating this work that's being contracted with the law firm? And then, you know, I would absolutely, you know, get like a manager involved, just by virtue of saying, like, I have questions, I don't feel comfortable with how this is being handled, and I need greater visibility. If you can loop in someone who oversees your work, who then understands the importance of, you know, ensuring you're able to keep contributing and doing that work, and then getting involved, you know, someone from your company who's interacting with them directly. I'm going to say that's one, like, how you can maintain visibility. You know, this isn't then a surprise to your manager or their boss. This isn't a surprise to HR, you know, because you've only communicated with one person. But folding all of those folks in to then, you know, have a very like level approach to, you know, I provided further evidence. I don't understand what is going on in my case or what is going into my case. I don't feel comfortable with that being filed before I can see it. And laying that out really clearly, you know, and then, you know, persistently escalating is how I would proceed there, because you have every right, if this is, you know, for your work sponsorship, to be able to understand what your strategy is and what's being included in your petition. But I will say, unfortunately, it's not common. See that from big law firms.
I mean, you're talking to a victim right here. I had to, and I've talked about this ad nauseum, that I had to wait for my attorney. I paid the attorney in full. The attorney midway said that, oh, my fees have increased by $1,100. Paid that in full. 9 months, no response. And whenever I got a chance, like I asked HR, and HR is like, oh, Dr. Paul, we are escalating these cases on an as-need basis. Remind you, my H-1B was expired. I'm like, how as-need basis are you saying this is? So anybody who thinks, like, out of curiosity, I know Ben, you're here to answer, like, overall questions, but how many people think that, man, EB1 and O1, everybody, it's oversaturated, everybody is applying for EB1, the standards are getting high? How many people feel like that? Yeah, there is no competition. Once you know what it takes to pursue EB1 and O1, the number of internal politics, the everyday guts that you need to have to persist, you will realize that you're just playing against yourself. Because this is not for the weak. And I mean it with a lot of, and I'll say it with my entire chest, that this is not something that you can do just by going and judging 9 million hackathons every weekend. No, this is the shit that we're talking about. Right? How many people have the patience to work with an immigration attorney, to be so patient when they're working with you, to negotiate with them how your case is being positioned, to then negotiate with your employer to write this letter? People would rather wait in EB2, EB3. So you have no competition. Just keep going. Cooper.
Thank you, Aditi. Thank you, Ben. My question is about the timeline. So it varies case to case, but once lawyer accept the case, how long it take for a submission? Because there will be a preparation of the support letter, draft, expert letter, and all. So on an average, if let's say profile is ready, how long it take for EB1A, EB1B cases to submit once lawyer accept the case?
I think that's a great question to ask directly to who you're consulting with, because it is going to vary by provider. It depends on, are you working with a boutique law firm where they just do EB1s and O1s? Are you working with a firm that, provides comprehensive business immigration and family immigration services, and they have a huge team, right? Asking questions about what their process is. Do you use AI to facilitate the drafting process? Do you, what is your case management software where I can see and track these things, right? What is your SLA or your service level agreement? What is your guarantee provider? Because it could be different from Boundless to Alma to Lighthouse, the big law firms, Ogletree, WF, Fragaman, BA Outright, they're all going to tell you something different. And so rather than me say, from this day to this day, you should expect that, I think those are the questions that you bring to a provider and say, once, like, if these things hold true, if I have like letter signers lined up, I know who's going to sign my advisory opinion, I know who can sign off on my critical role and original contribution letters, they've agreed to this, I have all of my evidence, what's it going to take your firm to do this? I think that's a much more fruitful question than like me guesstimating. I would say, like it's not unfair for it to take a month or 2 months, depending on who you're working with, so long as everything's put together, right?
That's a valid question. Also, like, if you can go to the slide where you see do's and don'ts.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is
Timelines.
what Ben is trying to say is, like, the way I think about it is an equation. There's a dependent variable and an independent variable. The dependent variable is how long is it going to take to file your EB1. We hyper fixate on that without thinking enough about our independent variable, which is our capacity of providing everything that we need to provide with objective clarity to the immigration firm. So once you have that right, that I've given you everything that you need in the format that you need, now it's a fair question to ask them how fast they can package it. But if we don't have our ingredients, and to put that entire onus on them and say, how fast can you get me in shape? That's not a valid question.
Yes, and I love the ingredients metaphor. It's one that I actually use often. It might be a matter of now I need to run back to the corner store and get like a stick of butter. Or it might be like I need to go milk a whole damn cow, right? Like, what is it going to take to get you what I need to then bake that cake?
All right. Milking a whole cow. Folks, in all fairness, we will have questions taken from Fasi and Prashant, and then we have to call it a day. Fasi, one question, Prashant, one question. Go for it. Fasi first.
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Aditi and Ben. I have a quick question. So basically, every field of endeavor is different, and what strategy or how a paralegal team will work. I mean, if they don't have the skill set to a particular field of endeavor.
So sorry, what is the question?
So if the field, every field of endeavor is different, right? I mean, so you get multiple cases, so everyone will have a different unique cases. So in that case, like how I mean, if a paralegal team doesn't have that particular skill set, in that case, like do they rely to the petitioner or the candidate?
Absolutely. So in my opinion, they shouldn't, right? I certainly have more experience working in certain fields, like, or with folks of certain fields of endeavor than others, but a good immigration services provider's biggest skill set, or one of their biggest skill sets, is going to be storytelling. I don't need to have experience in your field of endeavor. I might be able to work more quickly with folks who, oh, I know what IEEE, resources to include in their filing because I've done this before for certain people who've already, presented at that conference or something. But that's not going to inhibit me as a provider to understand how to define a field of endeavor, how to, once I know what that field is, go out and find, sources that validate that, do the knowledge work to frame this adequately. I don't think that should be something that like a provider says, oh no, well, I don't do anything for mechanical engineers. I think that's a terrible business practice, but it's also, if you think about the work that immigration services providers, paralegals, attorneys, like what we do is we know how to, I think it said in one of the earlier slides that I had, like the work of translation, right? So long as you have a clear idea of what your field is, and we can agree on achieve consensus there. I don't need to have the utmost experience working on cases in that area to have success, right? That's something that is part of the work we do, right? And it's also, frankly, like the most fun part. I get to learn about new things every day. So, I wouldn't say that's you definitely can ask, do you have experience working on people's fields in my field? And if they balk at that, or if they're not confident that might be a good internal indicator, in terms of your faith in their ability to provide service to you. But I think a provider worth their heft is going to turn down a case or say, oh, well, you work in this field. No, I think they're going to be willing to take on, if it's new to them, that challenge, but ultimately it's not going to be something, or shouldn't be something, that prevents you from moving forward with a particular provider.
All right, folks, we have 30 people over here. How many people are still paying attention? Let's see, because I want to ask a very spicy question to Benjamin Merrill. Okay, I'll be honest with you, Ben, what you said, again, I have been paying attention to things because I have context. These things I wouldn't have paid attention to had I not had context. Can I ask you something which is politically incorrect?
Oh, please.
Okay, you said that immigration paralegals are the people who will get the case strategy from the immigration lawyer, and you're the person who I am working with as a client to explain my work. You're writing my work. You are my translator. You're my Duolingo for USCIS. And you said something very important, which is that it's fun to learn about new things. Not every immigration paralegal thinks like you.
Oh, absolutely not. And they were
they can be suckers. So I'll give you an example of this person who came to me with an RFE, and the way the immigration petition was written clearly demonstrated that the immigration paralegal really did not do their homework. They repackaged and just ChatGPT'd that shit. and just regurgitated that there was no benchmarking, there was no nuance, nothing added. So having been an immigration paralegal, knowing what a good immigration paralegal is and a bad immigration paralegal is, can you give us the tea on that? That listen, if your immigration paralegal is doing this, you better ask for a refund because
Yeah,
this
absolutely. Absolutely. So especially in this day and age, right? Let's be real in terms of like the like access to like language learning models, generative AI, right? I use AI in my practice. I don't use it to, you know, as an authority, right? I use it to facilitate my work. You know, I give it inputs about somebody's work. It puts them out and I review it and I polish it and I ensure that there aren't M dashes all over the place and that the prose reads like humanly and that I know based on what my client has explained to me that it holds true and it is like I have strong faith that it is true to the field and all of that. You know, I think this is also an indication of like poor communication and partnership between a paralegal and the attorney, because again, the attorney is the one who's putting their name on this. If you're also working with a service provider that just prepares and doesn't have a G28, right? That even puts the onus further on you, where, you know, yeah, like there's definitely like varying quality here. And I was going to say, you know, like the larger firms tend to rely more on templates than more nimble providers that maybe have more advanced tech when it comes to this, where, you know, yeah, like I would absolutely, like, first of all, ask, like, did the attorney review this as well? You know, because you're working with a paralegal and it depends on, like, again, the firm that you're working at in terms of who you're necessarily interacting with first or the most. But sure as shit, you should know that if there's someone who's considered support staff working with an attorney and you receive something, the attorney have better done their review as well, right? That is the person who, if they're filing on your behalf, has to answer for these questions. And so I think it's like really important to, again, this is the importance of defining your field outright, but it's also the importance of establishing expectations around a review, right? I would highly encourage you to ask if you can review letters before they go out for signature. I would also highly encourage that you ask for review of your letters before you start working on memo or like the support letters, the exhibits. A lot of that work does happen in tandem, but typically a provider worth their snuff is going to ensure that letters are set so that way the narrative that we're presenting is supported by the evidence that we have, right?
What are the qualifications that an immigration attorney should be looking at when hiring an immigration paralegal that could be indicative of the quality that you're bringing to the table?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's a willingness to actually engage in like discourse or dialogue about like what it means to, you know, work in a certain field. You know, they need to be, not only hyper analytical, but hyper empathetic. So it's about like erudition, right? You want someone who's smart, who's sharp, who asks questions, who preemptively, you know, holds their mirror out ahead to look around the corner, but also someone who's going to take the time like I am to, you know, breaking down why that's all important. To someone who brings a little bit more humanity to the field of, you know, immigration services provision, right? I think it's like, you know, something that like when I look for when I'm helping with a hiring process for someone who's an immigration specialist or a paralegal, right? Not only are they, you know, a good writer, and they're, you know, project management oriented, right? But are they someone who is willing to get into what we can call the mess, right? Someone who enjoys working in that qualitative, subjective space of like, I need to really work with different stakeholders to like pin this down and achieve consensus, right? So folks who are not only, you know, like intellectual, right, but also like consensus builders, someone who like wants to involve all of their different stakeholders, someone who wants to ensure alignment across like a team. That's a really, really strong like skill set for a paralegal or an immigration specialist like me to have, right? Am I someone who knows how to run things up the totem pole, back down, who can see something and preempt a problem, right? And that comes also by virtue of experience, right? I've been doing this for 5-6 years now. I've seen a lot. That someone knew or what.
Agreed. That's something that you said with this person also told me, and I'm going to give the floor to Prashant. I know we're
Yes.
at 1:16.
Yeah.
This person, like, again, something that you just said so matter-of-factly, which was such a big difference maker for this person. He worked with a very prominent law firm. You all know that law firm. I'm not going to say the name of the law firm. But this person said that, Aditi, when I was working with this immigration paralegal, I didn't feel like he felt where I was coming from. Like he was just another person. Like he has never faced immigration battles, and it was so sterile for him. And that plays a key factor because that reflects in the way your story is positioned. Take it for what it is. Prashant Kotkar.
Yes. Yeah, thank you, Aditi and Ben. So I do have a quick question about, I'm in the middle of the filing my NIW first in the next week. That is going to submit with USCIS right now. Everything we compile. I work with the one of the attorney, and they suggested go with the NIW first, and then we can take approval. After approval, we can go with the EB1 case. Basically, I'm strongly feeling that I already compiled a lot of documentation for EB1 and proving that out of 10, 8 criteria basically that is very strong for my supportive in case. So I don't want to waste my time until I will get the NIW approval. Can I file my case EB1 parallelly? Also, my decision factor for the NIW, can I go with the premium or not to go with the premium, and can I file parallelly with the EB1 in that case?
Yeah, I think then, so, I think it's up to you to advocate to skip the NIW if you are comfortable with, and see the way that a provider, the way that like my heart and my mind right now are like,
Sure.
Do you understand the risk, right?
Yes.
Is this something where like I'm willing, I'm never not going to tell someone like don't go with EB1A if I can look at your profile and say like check. What I'll say is like 3 strong criteria backed up by 2, if not 3 medium strength criteria is like the threshold you want to go for in terms of like confidence that you might still get an RFE. 1/3 of cases nationally get RFE. That is what it is. But in terms of just like risk tolerance, if a provider says you fit more of an EB2 profile for now, whatever, you certainly have the right to say, no, I would rather go for the EB1 in recognition that what you are also signaling is that you have a higher tolerance for risk because they've assessed that it is a higher bar, right?
Yes.
But from a finances perspective and a time perspective, yeah, you don't want to pay 2 sets of filing fees. You don't want to pay a second legal fee. I think it is worth pushing back and saying, no, like, listen, like, look at what I see in my case. Tell me why this doesn't work. And like use that as the foundation for dialogue over why you should or shouldn't, upgrade to EB1 right away. Right. I also think this is the importance of getting more than 1 or 2 opinions, right? So that way you're not like halfway down the stream with one provider.
Yeah, actually, when I get when I gave my case 1 year back, actually to them, they evaluated. But between 1 year gap, I created a lot of evidences basically that is supporting for my EB1A, and that's literally profile building. I already means based on original contribution from my side that I already proven out actually, and compiled the more than 300 pages documentation basically for that. But I'm just in the middle of situation. I need to get a right solution, and they are not ready to take EB1A right away. Like they just want to use whatever they approve a refund strategy for NIW first, and then they suggested to upgrade your case in future case. But I'm ready to work with the other attorney, those who can support basically, or just in case if I can file independently, self-petition filing.
Yeah.
What is your opinion? Self-petition filing, is that worth it?
Prashant, we only have one question.
Sure.
This is turning into a personal strategy session, which we do not have room for. But listen, if we have to end with Prashant's question, I'll tell you this. I wish somebody told me this as well. However much planning you're going to do, you're going to be traumatized. This is like therapy. Like our parents. We are going to therapy because our parents I hope our children go to therapy also.
Agree,
the
agree.
number
Sorry
of
about that.
days-
Thank you.
Just the number of days that you go to therapy should decrease, right? Like, so you can take as many preemptive measures as you can. You can make as good of decisions as you can, make it the most informed. But just like anything else in life, there's going to be trial and error. What we're trying to do over here is mitigate the number of trial and errors that you have. So that's what I'll leave you with, that I'm really glad that you are thinking through this as you should. But at the same time, be open to the fact that this is going to be a stressful journey. It just is. It just is. But
And
that's life. Yeah,
it's going to be a stressful journey, and you should have a provider that understands that.
correct. Correct. Ben, before I let you go, and for folks who have stayed here 20 minutes over time, any secret words of advice that you left for the very end that you would like to give us?
You know what? I don't have anything groundbreaking, but what I will say, yeah, we're people too. You know, obviously, like, we're in the industry of providing a certain service, and there's a lot that comes, you know, people don't get into US immigration versus being a patent attorney or working in, you know, big law contracts, M&A, whatever. Like, we do this because we are inherently people. At least the good ones are, right? So find a provider who is person first. You know, if you feel that it's sterile, if you feel like you're being given a script by a salesperson or, you know, a managing partner, that, like, follow your gut. You want to work with someone who you would want to have like a you know, professional relationship with, and that's someone who inherently, you know, can demonstrate to you that they understand what it is that you are asking for from your perspective, right? I'm, you know, natural born US citizen. I'm from Chicago, right? That doesn't mean that I don't take very seriously what it is that, like, my clients are coming to me in need of, right? And that's something that, you know, I share, you know, my personal investment in, right? Like, I understand the gravity and the investment of not just your finances, not just your time, but your career, your aspiration, your vocation, right? And if you don't get that vibe, and it's going to be a vibe, trust me, like, you know, if you don't feel that this is somebody that takes your case seriously and understands, like, the weight of what we are setting off to do together, and if it doesn't feel like you're setting off to do something together, that's when you know to keep looking, right? And this is to the point of, you know, cash is king, right? You know, you don't want to go with the cheapest and fastest provider necessarily. You want to go with the one that you feel is going to care for you the most, right? And that's what I'll leave it at in terms of, you know, I'm not the only person that knows these things, right? I'm not the only person who's qualified to assemble evidence and frame it in a certain way that's friendly to the USCIS. But what makes me different than other providers is that I know what I can stand by and what I can do for other people, and that I'm willing to take the time to answer those questions, to explain this, to take you and your concerns seriously, even if, you know, from my perspective, I can dissuade them, you know, like, making you feel seen, heard, and understood is the most important part of this process in terms of building trust and feeling like you can trust your provider. And so that's what I'll end on, you know.
That's amazing.
A very human experience, and you want to have a companion, not an autonomous pilot, right?
Agreed completely. Trust and transparency, that's what you need.
Absolutely.
Easier said than done. Thank you so much, Ben, for staying 25 minutes over there.
Sure, my pleasure. I do this
Oh
for a
my God.
living. It's my favorite thing to do.
We want to have you back, so I'm going to let you go, but with the promise that you're going to be back with more knowledge to impart. I would
Sooner
love-
than last time, for sure.
Yes. All right. Take care, Ben. Take care, everybody. Great job.
Good one, everyone. Feel free to connect on LinkedIn. I'm
Yep,
happy.
I've dropped Ben's LinkedIn in the chat. Awesome. Thank you, Ben. Appreciate you. Appreciate everybody. Take
Happy
care.
Sunday, y'all.
Bye.
Cheers.